In the spring of 1864, Eleanor Whitcomb arrived at the Ashdown Institute for Gifted Girls under a bruised gray sky. The sea wind tore through the heather fields as her carriage wound its way up the narrow, crumbling path toward the estate. The institute itself stood like a stone sentinel atop the cliffs of North Yorkshire, its turrets silhouetted against the churning North Sea, a picture of discipline, solitude, and lofty ambition. To the world, Ashdown was an emblem of educational progress. A pioneering boarding school established for the elevation of Britain's brightest daughters, it accepted girls from both noble families and exceptional minds of lower birth, so long as they showed signs of genius. Its patron, Sir Alaric Hargrave, was a former member of Parliament known for championing scientific morality and moral hygiene ideas, gaining popularity in some corners of the Victorian elite. Eleanor, 29, daughter of a retired physician and a former governess herself, had long dreamed of contributing to a place where intellect in women was nurtured, not merely tolerated. She had studied natural sciences, an unusual choice for a woman in her time, and had tutored privately for several years. The offer from Ashdown had come swiftly after she submitted a sample lesson plan to the Hargrave Educational Trust. In her journal, Eleanor wrote of her first glimpse of the school. Ashdown rises from the earth like something grown rather than built. The limestone is mottled as if it has absorbed centuries of weather and silence. It is beautiful, and yet it chills me. I feel as though I've arrived at the edge of the known world. She was met by Miss Sybil Wren, the school's headmistress, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled tightly back and a voice low and precise. Sybil welcomed her with polite reserve and led her on a tour of the school. The institute housed 42 girls, aged 9 to 16, divided into 3 circles based not on age, but what Sybil termed mental formation. Those in the highest circle wore navy wool uniforms rather than gray, and were permitted access to the East Wing Library and its experimental chamber. The girls were intelligent, poised, but strangely subdued. As Eleanor passed groups of them during her tour, she noted something odd. Few spoke. Most stared straight ahead or fixed their eyes on the floor. When spoken to, they replied correctly but without warmth or spontaneity. Eleanor assumed this was the result of strict discipline or boarding school nerves. Her teaching quarters were modest but comfortable, a small chamber on the 2nd floor overlooking the moors. She would be teaching botany and basic anatomy with occasional lectures on astronomy. It was unusual, she thought, that the girls' exposure to science was limited to specific approved subjects. Chemistry and physiology were notably absent from the curriculum. That evening, she was invited to dine with the faculty. The staff included 5 teachers, all women, and 1 school physician, Dr. James Mortimer, a dour man in his 40s with ink-stained fingers and a gaze that seemed always distracted. The conversation at dinner was polite, though curiously lacking in personal detail. No one asked about her background or her journey. Instead, discussions revolved around pupil evaluations, dietary compliance, and disciplinary recalibrations. Eleanor assumed these were euphemisms for detention or physical correction common at the time. Later, when she retired to her room, she noticed something peculiar. Inside the writing desk provided for her there was an envelope with no name. Inside was a single sheet of yellowing paper. In faint, trembling ink, the words, "They drink something at night." The blue glass cup. "Watch their eyes in the morning. You mustn't let them see you see." There was no signature. She held the note under candlelight for several minutes, her pulse quickening. She considered reporting it. But to whom? The headmistress. The physician. She didn't even know if it had been meant for her. This note would be the first in a long chain of hidden messages, journal entries, and unfiled correspondence that would later form the basis of the Ashdown Inquiry, a decade-suppressed investigation into one of the most sophisticated programs of psychological manipulation ever undertaken in a British educational institution. Back in 1864, Eleanor kept the note folded carefully between the pages of her copy of a treatise on phrenology. She told herself it was likely the rambling of a disturbed student. And yet, when she awoke the next morning and passed the youngest girls in the breakfast hall, she looked. Their eyes were glassy. their pupils unnaturally dilated, and each of them held a small blue glass cup. That day Eleanor began to pay attention. If Ashdown's youngest girls struck Eleanor as muted, then the pupils of the upper circle were something else entirely. They were brilliant, undeniably so. In her very first lesson on plant taxonomy, a student named Clara Ventham completed the full Linnaean classification of 27 local flora without hesitation. Another Elspeth Reed corrected Eleanor's Latin pronunciation with scholarly precision, but none of them asked questions. None ever smiled. Their brilliance had no joy in it, only cold perfect recall. Their heads remained unnaturally still when spoken to eyes focused like predators or prey. Eleanor wrote in her journal, "It is as if the light within them has been replaced with something artificial. They answer, but they do not respond. It unnerves me more than silence." The upper circle lived in the East Wing, an ornate portion of the estate closed to lower-level students and most staff. Eleanor was told that they had private instruction in advanced logic, ancient languages, and internal discipline. Only 3 staff members were permitted access to the East Wing after dark: Headmistress Sybil Wren, Dr. James Mortimer, and a woman referred to only as Madame Felbridge, a figure Eleanor had not yet met. The others, when questioned, grew tight-lipped. Archival letter from Eleanor to her friend Catherine in Harrogate, 1864. Catherine, something here is wrong. These girls are exceptional in intellect, but they behave like machines. I fear what they are being taught is not truth, but obedience, and I am not permitted to speak freely with them. I know I must tread carefully, but something inside me whispers, do not look away. E.W. Eleanor's concern deepened when she was assigned study supervision over 3 upper circle girls during afternoon sessions. One of them, Lottie Gray, stood out. Lottie was 13, pale, with delicate features and deep-set eyes. She spoke beautifully like a trained speaker, but always in declarative statements, never speculations. One afternoon, Eleanor asked the group a simple hypothetical: if we imagine a species of flower that opens only during lunar eclipses, what adaptations might it require? The other 2 girls offered textbook-safe responses: sensitivity to photoperiodism, nocturnal pollination. Lottie, however, went still. Her eyes narrowed. Then she said softly, "Such a flower would not be natural. It would require construction. Like us." The room fell silent. The 2 other girls looked at her not with confusion, but with something like fear. Before Eleanor could ask a follow-up, the bell rang. The girls rose in unison, their chairs scraping the floor in perfect synchrony. They filed out. That night, Eleanor sat by her window and watched the East Wing. Around midnight, she saw a faint glow through the arched window of the uppermost turret. It pulsed steadily like a heartbeat. She made note of the time. The next morning, Lottie was not in class. She did not return the following day either. When Eleanor inquired, Sybil Wren's reply was dry. Miss Gray has been withdrawn by her guardians. But none of the carriages had come or gone. The front gate had not opened. That evening, Eleanor checked the dormitory rosters. Lottie's name had been scratched out not in ink, but with a blade. Survivor interview. Rosemary Clements recorded in 1908. We all knew what it meant when someone disappeared from the upper circle. Sometimes it was after a ceremony. Sometimes after they asked the wrong question. Lottie saw too much, and she remembered. That was her mistake. Determined to understand what was happening, Eleanor began observing the students more carefully, especially their morning routines. She noticed something deeply disturbing. Each upper circle girl received a small blue glass cup on a silver tray before first bell. They were administered not by staff, but by girls in the middle circle under silent supervision from the physician. The drink inside was milky, with a faint lavender hue. After drinking, each girl was silent for precisely 6 minutes. Then, without cue, they would rise and begin their day. Eleanor discreetly took one of the empty cups left behind on a shelf and rinsed it into a paper filter. The residue stained the paper faintly violet. When she tried to preserve it, however, the color evaporated within seconds. She wrote in her journal, "I believe the substance is chemical in nature. Possibly a tincture, but more likely something derived from alkaloids. Its effects seemed to suppress emotion without reducing cognitive function. Whoever designed it knew precisely what they wanted. On Friday of that week, the chapel bell rang 3 times before dawn, something Eleanor had not yet witnessed. When she asked another teacher what it meant, the woman's face went white. "It means there's been a realignment," she said carefully. "You should remain in your quarters." Eleanor did not. She took a candle, slipped on her coat, and stepped silently into the corridor. And that's when she saw it. 2 staff members, not teachers, dragging a small body wrapped in cloth toward the back door of the kitchen. The feet were bare. One arm slipped out from the sheet. It was a child's arm. They didn't see her, or if they did, they pretended not to. That morning, a girl from the lower circle, name unknown to Eleanor, was simply gone. No explanation was given. But Eleanor knew the pattern had begun. Madam Felbridge arrived without announcement. She entered the staff room at midday, tall and severe in a black wool dress buttoned to the collar. Her presence shifted the room. Conversations ceased. Even Sybil Wren rose without being asked. No titles were exchanged, just Madame. Within the hour a notice was posted. Eleanor would observe an upper circle session in the East Wing the next morning under Felbridge's instruction. No explanation given. The classroom was windowless and cold. 8 girls sat in symmetrical rows, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. There were no books, no slates, no pens. Madam Felbridge stood at the front, hands clasped behind her back. She began the lesson without greeting. She spoke of scaffolding, not architectural but moral. She described emotion as an obstacle to growth. She said memory was not sacred but constructible. She said the ideal child was not found but made. Then she used a term Eleanor had never encountered, the doctrine of formation. The girls did not react. Their posture remained unchanged. Felbridge's tone never rose. She stated that obedience was not the outcome of learning, it was the foundation of it. When the session ended, the girls stood in unison, turned and left without a word. Eleanor approached Felbridge and asked about the doctrine. Felbridge studied her face for a moment, then replied that the material was internal, restricted to formation services and not relevant to academic staff. That night, a slim unmarked manuscript was slipped under Eleanor's door. No note, no signature. It was bound in twine, handwritten in black ink. The cover read only Doctrine of Formation, Hargrave, Internal Manuscript. Inside, the language was cold and procedural. The first section outlined a process in 4 phases. Phase 1, isolation, removal of family identity, restriction of environmental stimulus, monitored silence. Phase 2, calibration, introduction of mood stabilizers, visual fixation routines, neutral phrase cycles. Phase 3, reinsertion, implantation of preferred moral schema, authority, linked phrase response, tactile suppression. Phase 4, transfer readiness, subject demonstrates response uniformity, erasure of extrinsic identity markers, compliant projection under observation. The margins contained calculations, dosage tables, age suitability, lists of contraindications. One line near the end read, failure acceptable if prior consolidation complete. The final sentence on the last page read, the true mind is not what she has. It is what we leave behind. The handwriting matched none of the staff Eleanor knew. She placed the manuscript between the lining of her trunk and a layer of old letters. The next morning at chapel, she noticed Felbridge watching the congregation, not the pulpit. The girls of the upper circle sat perfectly still. Not one shifted, not one coughed. After the service, Eleanor walked beside Clara Ventham and asked without preamble, "Do you remember your home?" Clara blinked once and replied, "My home is here." The voice was flat, the tone rehearsed. Later that evening, Eleanor tried to access the lower circle dormitory. The hallway was empty, but the door had been barred from the outside with a sliding bolt. She walked past it slowly, pretending not to notice. In her journal, she wrote only 2 words, locked children. 3 nights later, a red ribbon appeared on the staircase leading to the East Wing. No one explained. That same night, the girls of the upper circle were escorted into the East Wing after dinner. They returned just before midnight. One was missing Elspeth Reed. Her bed was stripped. Her name was removed from the lesson ledger. No mention was made the next day. Eleanor returned to her trunk the following evening to reread the manuscript. It was gone. The lining was intact, her letters untouched. In its place was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was deliberate. "We are watching what you choose to remember." She did not sleep that night. Eleanor woke at 3:17 a.m. to a sound behind the wall, faint at first, then rhythmic. It came from the east corridor near the staircase to the tower. A tapping. 4 beats. Silence. Then 4 more. She rose, wrapped her shawl, and opened her door. The corridor was empty. She followed the sound to a narrow utility door marked for maintenance. It was locked. She placed her ear against the wood. The tapping stopped, then breathing. Shallow. On the other side, she returned to her room, recorded the time, and did not sleep again. At breakfast, none of the staff mentioned anything unusual. Madame Felbridge was absent. Sybil Wren looked pale. The girls remained quiet. The upper circle filed in last as always. One desk remained empty. Clara Ventham. By noon, Clara's belongings had been removed. Eleanor checked the attendance log. Clara's name had been crossed out, not erased, but drawn through with a ruler and ink. It was the 4th name that month. She asked a kitchen girl about the tapping. The girl froze, then looked away and whispered, "The walls listen, miss. Best not tap back." Eleanor returned to the corridor at dusk. The maintenance door was slightly ajar. Inside, stone steps curved downward, steps not marked on the academy's blueprints. She descended. The air grew cold. The walls narrowed. At the bottom, she reached a chamber unlit, lined with stone. At the far end, metal shelves held rows of glass jars labeled with initials and dates. No light, no movement. On a table, a leather-bound volume lay open. Each page listed names, dates, and notations. VR 1859, adjustment incomplete. ER 1861, behavioral spike, recycled. CV 1864, phase 4 terminated. Material retained. She closed the book. Beside it, a wooden crate contained blue glass bottles like those from the upper circle breakfast trays. Several were broken. A cloth lay soaked in residue. Eleanor took one intact bottle and slipped it into her coat. As she turned to leave, she heard it again. 4 taps, then breathing. She climbed the steps in silence. The next morning, she visited the small infirmary under the pretext of checking on a student with a cough. Dr. Mortimer was absent. The assistant nurse hesitated, then let her in. Inside a cabinet, Eleanor found a second bottle, identical shape but labeled differently, Lot 47 mid-cycle hold. She took note of the lot number. That night she boiled water, cut a small apple slice, and added 1 drop from the bottle she had taken. Within minutes, the apple browned, then turned gray. She recorded the reaction and flushed the contents. The following day, Eleanor requested a private meeting with Sybil Wren. She asked directly what Phase 4 meant. Wren said nothing for a long time, then said quietly, "You've seen too much. I cannot protect you." Before Eleanor could respond, Madame Felbridge entered the room. "You are not assigned to inquiry," Felbridge said. "This is your only warning." That night, Eleanor's journal was missing. Her clothes were folded differently. Nothing else was touched. She understood the message. 2 nights later, the tapping returned. She followed it again. This time, the chamber was not empty. A girl sat on the floor, legs crossed, rocking slightly. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. It was Clara Ventham. She looked up, said nothing. Eleanor whispered her name. Clara spoke only once. They took out the parts that asked questions. Then she looked down and did not speak again. Eleanor backed away. She did not run. She returned to her quarters, wrote everything from memory, sealed the pages inside a hollow wall panel behind the oil lamp, and waited for morning. The next day, Eleanor received a new teaching assignment, 2 additional grammar sessions, and removal from all upper circle duties. No explanation was given. Her questions to Sybil Wren were met with deflection. Madame Felbridge did not appear that week. She noticed subtle changes. The upper circle now entered class escorted by an unfamiliar staff member in gray. No eye contact, no deviation. When Eleanor crossed paths with the girls in the corridor, none acknowledged her. At staff meeting, the topic was curriculum restructuring. A new directive was issued: limit open discussion in class. All hypothetical or speculative questions were to be removed. Teaching was to emphasize precision order and moral clarity. Eleanor asked who approved this shift. The room fell silent. Then Sybil Wren responded, "It is from the Foundation Board. No further details." The phrase began appearing everywhere on notices and morning prayers on lesson plans. The Foundation endures. Eleanor visited the archive after hours. She searched for any record of the Foundation. There were no names, no faces, only directives signed with the seal, 3 interlocked circles. She traced the seal to a reference dated 1831, the Hargrave Formation Institute, a private trust for moral rehabilitation through structural discipline. That night, Eleanor reviewed old attendance logs. She found 32 names listed under departed prior to completion. 19 of them were upper circle. Several had the same final notation redirected to Hargrave. She returned to the lower chamber behind the maintenance door. Clara was no longer there. The bench was clean. The book remained. New entries had been added in identical handwriting. CV 1864, transfer complete. Subject compliant. Archive relocated. A new name appeared below: LG 1864, initial resistance. Phase 2 reset, LG Lottie Gray. Eleanor closed the book and sealed the chamber door. In her room, she began documenting everything in cipher. She used a childhood code numerical substitution in Latin stems. She hid the documents in the chapel's hollow organ pipe marked by a faint pencil cross. 3 days later, the music instructor was dismissed without notice. The organ was locked. A new lock brass. Eleanor said nothing. At dinner, she was seated beside a girl from the middle circle. Eleanor asked about Lottie. The girl whispered, "They make you forget her." The girl was moved to another table the next day. Her name was later missing from the week's chore rotation. One morning, Eleanor entered her classroom to find new posters on the wall diagrams of the human brain, labeled not anatomically but philosophically: conscience, devotion, obedience, control. The same week, Dr. Mortimer returned. He resumed morning health checks. The blue glass bottles reappeared. Eleanor watched carefully. Each girl swallowed without hesitation, then waited, eyes downcast. She followed the supply cart one morning. It led her to the cellar beneath the old dining hall. The room was locked. Inside, through a crack, she saw metal trays stacked with vials, a ledger book, and something covered with cloth still breathing. She did not return. By month's end, 2 more girls disappeared. No names spoken. No farewells. In chapel, Madame Falbridge gave a sermon. The soul is not born sacred. It is earned through submission. The girls did not react. Eleanor watched from the back pew, eyes open, hands clenched. The curriculum was no longer silence. It was erasure. A new administrative officer arrived from Hargrave the first week of November. His name was Mr. Calder. He did not teach. He carried a briefcase and wore gloves even indoors. He took over the central records room and restricted staff access without explanation. Eleanor requested access to old pupil assessments. Sybil Wren replied that the files were under review by Calder and that no staff were to retrieve them without clearance. That evening, Eleanor watched Calder from the end of the corridor. He entered the records room alone. 10 minutes later, the lights dimmed. She moved quietly to the edge of the door frame. The door had not fully latched. Inside, Calder stood at a desk sorting manila folders marked Transfer Category 3. The pages were coded initials, dates, incident summaries, and 2 designations: viable or redirect. She saw LG Lottie Gray, status redirect, incident non-compliant episode. Notes, memory re-encoding incomplete. Final line scheduled for repurposed containment. She memorized the exact phrasing. Another folder contained CV Clara Ventham, status viable, phase 4 complete, Disposition asset returned, no mention of destination. She stepped back before Calder turned. The next morning, Eleanor visited the West Attic storage where retired class materials were kept. Inside a discarded trunk of lesson plans, she found a torn envelope addressed to Miss A. Greaves, Matron, Hargrave, Trust Facility, Middlesex. The postmark was dated 3 years prior. The letter inside unsigned detailed adjustments to stimulus resistance in 3 students and recommended full placement under Madame F. The initials matched past student roles. She copied the contents and burned the original in the hearth. That night, she met Sybil Wren outside the dormitory corridor. Wren looked exhausted. Eleanor asked, "Do you know where they go?" Wren replied. "There are 3 vans that leave each term. No school crest, no return. Have you ever seen one come back?" Wren said nothing, then turned and walked away. The next day, 2 new girls arrived. Middle circle. No prior records. Eleanor checked the intake ledger. Their spaces had replaced names previously crossed out. There was no gap. No notation of withdrawal or disappearance. Only new names over old ones. The academy wasn't losing students. It was replacing them. Eleanor waited until Sunday when Calder attended chapel and entered the records room again. She located the ledger marked Annual Outcomes Cohort Upper C3. Inside were 3 categories reassigned redacted, reintegrated. She saw her own initials at the bottom of a draft sheet EW Observation Level 2, Provisional Delay. She replaced the file and left. The wind that night rattled the windows. In the hallway, the red ribbon returned, this time tied to the staff wing railing. By dawn, Eleanor's bed had been stripped. She returned from breakfast to find a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside, a single word typed in block print. Remember. Winter arrived early. Snow fell in thick silence across the east wing, masking movement and sound. Eleanor noted that 3 names had vanished from the dormitory roster since the first snowfall. None were spoken of. No announcements. Their spaces filled within 2 days by new girls in clean uniforms, silent and wide-eyed. The academy logbook labeled the period Winter Consolidation Term. No standard lesson plans. Instead, moral schema sessions. Physical calibration, devotional reflection. The girls' daily schedules shifted. Mornings were shortened. Afternoons lengthened into unspecified formation periods. Blue glass vials were administered twice daily. Eleanor counted the tray's 24 bottles at breakfast, then again at dusk. The music wing was sealed. All instruments removed. Chapel services doubled in frequency. Madame Felbridge's voice echoed louder now, sermons fixated on transformation sanctified detachment identity as burden. Eleanor wrote daily, storing each page in the hollow pipe organ chamber behind the locked panel. She had memorized every creak of the floorboards, every gap in the patrol pattern of Calder's rounds. One Thursday, she followed a cleaning girl who carried discarded materials from the east wing. Among them, she noticed a torn page from a lesson evaluation marked Cycle Termination. The name was smudged, but the handwriting matched Calder's notes. She retrieved it and hid it in her sleeve. The note read Subject deviated from phrase sequence. Memory scaffold failed. Recommendation: permanent, withdrawal from circle rotation. Transfer non-viable. Later that night, Eleanor heard movement in the corridor. She opened her door a crack. A group of girls were being escorted barefoot, heads, lowered arms, folded toward the west cellar. No staff spoke. No girl resisted. Eleanor waited 15 minutes, then followed at distance. The cellar door was ajar. Inside, silence. The scent of ammonia. A row of empty beds, straps at the wrists. At the far end, an incinerator furnace stood cold but recently cleaned. No files were kept in that room. The next day, Calder posted a revised enrollment notice. 3 new names had been added. No prior records. Same handwriting. In chapel, Felbridge delivered a sermon titled Obedience is Mercy. The girls did not blink. Eleanor recorded everything. She began cross-referencing name states and bottle lot numbers. A pattern formed. Every girl marked redirect had received double dosing in the 3 days prior to removal. Every viable student had undergone something listed as mirror recalibration. She asked Sybil Wren what that phrase meant. Wren answered, They're taught to see only what they're allowed to recall. Eleanor asked, and if they resist, Wren replied, then they vanish. Not just from here. From memory. That night, Eleanor returned to her own record in the personnel file. Her name was missing. In its place, staff designate E-witness classification. No room number, no subject code. She had become a variable. The system had noticed her, and it had begun preparing to erase her. Eleanor no longer appeared in staff briefings. Her name was absent from the weekly rota. Yet her key still opened her quarters and meals still arrived outside her door. She existed in function, but not on paper. She entered the east wing through the laundry passage where no surveillance reached. In the staff file annex, she found a drawer labeled Supplemental Classifications. Inside a single folder, EW Witness Classification. It held 3 pages. Page 1, Observation Log. Her activities had been recorded for weeks. Library access corridor routes, chapel notes. Her questions to Sybil Wren were transcribed verbatim. Page 2 Psychological Profile. Assessed as Independent Moralist Schema. High deviation risk. Trained memory retention. Projection uncertain. Page 3 Directive. If cognitive compliance fails subject to reprocessing or external severance under Clause 4.7. Clause 4.7 was not defined. She returned to the file and closed the drawer. That night, she attempted to contact the outside. The Academy's telegraph was sealed. The postal log showed all outgoing letters routed through Hargrave Trust screened and re-stamped. Her messages had never left the building. She wrote by hand 10 pages addressed to the Ministry of Education, then burned the envelope. There was no way out through official means. The following morning, she was called to a reflection assembly. First time in 2 months. The gathering was held in the central hall, unheated, echoing with footsteps. Madame Felbridge stood at the front. Behind her, 3 unfamiliar men in black coats and clerical collars. Felbridge addressed the girls. Memory is mercy. Conscience is pain. We release you from both. One by one, the girls were called forward. Lottie Gray's name was not among them. Eleanor remained at the back, unseen, uncalled. Later, she asked Sybil Wren what the assembly meant. Wren answered, they are confirming pliability. And if they fail, Wren did not reply. The next day, the East Wing was closed entirely. Girls were relocated without notice. The 3rd floor previously off-limits was reopened. No explanation. Eleanor climbed the stairs that night. The hallway was lined with doors, each numbered no names. Room 3F was unlocked. Inside a bed, a desk, a mirror facing inward. No books, no window. In the desk drawer, she found a page torn from a diary, dated 2 years prior. The handwriting matched an old pupil file, Mr. Margaret Rilling's. The page read, they don't want obedience. They want deletion. They want the body without the soul, the mouth without the memory. I said the wrong word. They called it deviation. Tomorrow I leave this room. I don't think I return. Margaret Rillings was listed in the old ledgers as withdrawn voluntary. She had not left. She had been silenced. That night, Eleanor moved all her hidden writings, everything, to the old chapel tower. Beneath the floorboards under the first pew, she built a second archive. She knew what was coming. The system had begun erasing her, and she had one final choice: disappear or be remembered. Eleanor returned to the chapel after curfew. She waited until the last lantern dimmed, then unlocked the side door using the ring she'd kept since her 2nd week. The air was still. The silence was whole. She knelt at the first pew. The loose floorboard lifted easily now. Beneath it, 27 documents, ciphered reports, names, timelines, observations, copied letters, and sketches of the basement facility. She sealed them in oilcloth, wrapped in linen, placed in a brass box marked Organ Repairs, 1857, then buried deeper beneath the flagstone. This archive would not disappear. By morning, the Academy issued a staff bulletin, Structural Review, East Wing suspended, staff realignment in effect. Eleanor's room was reassigned, her belongings boxed. She was relocated to the attic, a cold exposed space beside the bell tower. She found no bedding, no table, just a chair. Later that day, Calder summoned her. The office was dim. He offered no seat. He placed a file on the desk, unlabeled, inside her full profile. Timeline intercepted correspondence incident reports. You've interfered with a protected program, Calder said. You've violated Clause 4.7, Eleanor asked. Where are the girls sent? He replied where their memories no longer matter. She asked, what is Hargrave? He did not answer. Instead, he slid across a document. Release agreement. Blank signature line. Terms voluntary departure. Relinquishment of all claims. Non-disclosure in perpetuity. Eleanor left the document unsigned. That evening, the tower bells rang at an unscheduled hour. The girls were gathered in the central hall. Madame Felbridge stood with Calder. A girl was brought forward. Not Lottie. One Eleanor did not know. She spoke a sentence, I do not remember the wrong words. The audience repeated it. Eleanor remained silent. Felbridge's eyes met hers. The next morning, Eleanor was not assigned any duties. Her meals were withheld. Her coat removed from the corridor peg. By nightfall, her name had been scrubbed from the teaching rota in chalk. She was now unlisted. She returned to the pew. The archive remained intact, but one document had been moved placed above the rest. A fresh page. New handwriting. A single line. They know where it is now. She sealed the floor and fled the chapel. By morning, the building was locked. Chapel services suspended. All access revoked. Calder's van arrived before noon. No insignia, 2 drivers, 2 crates. One labeled reclamation, the other terminated secondary material. Eleanor was not called, but she knew her time had narrowed. She returned to the attic, removed the remaining pages from behind the beam, sewed them into the hem of her coat. That night, she did not sleep. She waited for the knock. It never came. But the walls began to tap. At dawn, Eleanor descended before staff awoke. She moved through the maintenance stairwell past the sealed infirmary toward the west cellar. The lock had changed. The door bore a new placard reserved Phase 4. She pried it open using an old iron slat wedged from the banister. Inside, the cellar had changed. The beds were gone, the straps removed. In their place, 4 standing partitions each with an interior chair restraints, a glass dome overhead. Panels on the wall glowed faintly mechanical switches, cables feeding into the floor. A notebook lay on the table. Eleanor opened it. Pages filled with procedural codes. Subject presented with reflection loop, Phase 2, mirror induction failure, Phase 3, memory, wipe-initiated resistance, logged, Phase 4, witness integration protocol, suspended pending review. Below it, her initials. EW, she heard footsteps above. Eleanor exited through the back stair into the disused kitchen, then down into the crypt corridor. There, she found a loose stone beneath the plaque marked In Memoriam, Headmistress Leclerc, 1826, 1839. Behind it, a bundle of parchment letters. Ink faded but legible. Written by former pupils, all addressed to no one. They have made me forget my name. I spoke and they erased it. I sang once, and then I didn't. Eleanor copied 3, returned them, and resealed the wall. By evening, the girls no longer greeted her. Not by fear, but unfamiliarity. Those who once knew her now looked through her. The erasure had begun. She returned to Sybil Wren for the last time. They've moved the entire memory induction system to the 3rd floor, Wren said. Felbridge calls it the final lesson, and after Eleanor asked, Wren looked down. No girl remembers what happens after, not even me. That night, Eleanor ascended to the 3rd floor. The corridor was silent. At the end, a single open door. Room 3C, inside the same partition she'd seen below, mirrored, wired, prepared. And one girl inside, Lottie Gray. She sat quietly, eyes forward, expression blank. Eleanor whispered her name, no reaction. She stepped closer. Lottie. Do you remember? Clara Lottie blinked once, then whispered. They took her voice. Eleanor reached out, but the glass dome descended. The room went red. Sirens, footsteps, doors locking. She fled, down the staircase, through the music wing, into the garden, over the fence. By dawn, she reached the post road. She handed the sewn coat to a passing tradesman with a message delivered to the Gazette. No return address. She did not keep a copy. 1 week later, St. Cecilia's Academy burned. Official cause: electrical fire in the East Wing. No survivors recorded, no students listed. Only one unverified sighting: a woman walking west in a coat too heavy for spring hands, empty eyes forward. No name given, but the Gazette published 23 names, and the ministry opened an inquiry, and the foundation dissolved, and the archive beneath the pew was never found. The fire was reported at 2:47 a.m. by a groundskeeper from the neighboring parish. By the time local constables arrived, the East Wing had collapsed. The tower fell shortly after. No alarms had sounded, no evacuation recorded, no official student list submitted for rescue. The Hargrave Trust released a single statement: a regrettable incident at a historic property. All records were archived off-site, but no records arrived at the ministry. The foundation's ledgers were missing. The headmistress, Felbridge, was never seen again. 2 weeks later, a package reached the editorial office of the York Gazette. Inside, 27 documents. Oil-smeared charred at the edges but intact. Names, intake logs, reprocessing notes, internal directives, a cover page in Eleanor Whitcomb's hand. The Gazette published 3 excerpts. 1 month later, a formal tribunal opened under the Home Secretary. The trust was dissolved. Several former board members fled. One was arrested attempting to enter Belgium. Another disappeared en route to deposition. The phrase "witness classification" entered official review. Survivors began to write in. Clara Ventham, now in her 50s, submitted a letter confirming her presence at Ashdown in 1862. She recalled Blue Vial's sermons and a mirror chair. Her memories ended abruptly after a winter assembly. Margaret Rillings's name was confirmed. Her family had been told she died of fever in 1863. But no death certificate existed. Her handwriting was matched to a recovered journal fragment. Lottie Gray's fate was never confirmed. One photograph emerged unlabeled, undated, of a girl resembling her standing in the background of a 1901 mission photo in Nairobi. Eleanor Whitcomb was never located. But every week for 3 years a new envelope arrived at the Gazette. Always unsigned. Always sealed in linen. Each with a note, they erased the names. I remember them. In 1904, a government commission ruled the events at Ashdown as a breach of educational and human standards. The findings were sealed for 30 years. When the files were finally opened in 1935, only one annotation remained handwritten in the margin of the final report: "Let no place of learning become a place of forgetting." The tribunal uncovered that Ashdown Institute had functioned under a concealed directive issued in 1856 marked Doctrina Silentii, or Doctrine of Silence. Its principal memory as a liability in moral correction. Girls who resisted indoctrination were not punished, they were deleted. The methodology was listed in 4 stages: deviation flagging, monitored through behavior journals; memory disruption introduced via mirror loop sequences and dosing; personhood fragmentation initiated in recalibration rooms; erasure or witness classification based on compliance threshold. The practice was funded by Hargrave Trust and sanctioned under experimental clauses written into early 19th century educational reform acts. The doctrine claimed moral justification. It used language of salvation healing intellectual alignment, but the internal documents revealed otherwise. The goal wasn't virtue, it was obedience without residue, speech without self. Over 200 intake names were recovered. 87 listed as redirected, 41 as withdrawn voluntary, 34 marked unknown, 9 listed as terminated with no cause. These categories had no legal standing, but they carried weight in how the state interpreted reform, and how institutions were allowed to correct the deviant, defiant, or ungrateful female. Eleanor's writings reframed the conversation. Her phrase, "They wanted the body without the soul," was quoted in Parliament. Not all responded with belief. Some claimed fabrication. Others called it exaggeration. A few defended the doctrine's aims as necessary for social cohesion in morally fragile subjects. But the testimonies grew. A woman from Exeter submitted a diary from her aunt dated 1861 describing girls disappearing into the attic corridor. Another, a nurse, recalled transporting sedated girls to unnamed private clinics. Still, there was no conclusive proof of what happened in room 3C. Only a single line etched faintly beneath the floorboard discovered when the remaining structure was cleared in 1902. It read, I said the wrong word, and then they took the world. In 1907, the Independent Memory Commission opened a quiet inquiry. Not official, not public, just letters. Survivors, real or self-identified, were asked one question. What do you remember? The answers arrived slowly. Some wrote single lines. Others sent pages torn from old hymnals annotated with whispered recollections. Most began the same way. At first I remembered nothing, but then fragments broke through. A woman in Manchester recalled a silver whistle that signaled sleep. A woman in Sheffield described being told her parents had donated her mind to service. A woman in Norwich remembered a girl named Eleanor who told her, "They can't erase what you give away." One survivor, writing under the name MG, recounted waking during her own recalibration. She saw herself in the mirror, but the reflection blinked before she did. She closed her letter with, "I forgot who I was." But when I heard that the school burned, I knew who I'd been. The commission compiled 92 entries. Some were unverifiable, others confirmed by matching handwriting scars, missing persons notices, boarding records. A common phrase emerged among survivors. They taught us to forget the pain, but they forgot we remembered the silence. Eleanor's final archive was never found. The pew had been removed, the floor paved over, but her presence lingered in footnotes and margins and letters that referenced EW as if she were still moving behind walls. By 1911, memory resistance programs were outlawed in all state-funded institutions. Private academies were required to submit full transparency reports. The Hargrave Trust no longer existed, but its funding fingerprints stretched wide into clinics, training houses, and so-called recovery homes. When asked why no official prosecuted those responsible, the ministry issued only one statement: justice belongs to the living. What happened at Ashdown belongs to memory, and memory, we are told, is fallible. But the girls remembered, even without proof, even without their full names, even when the world refused to look back. They remembered. And so did history. In 1938, a clerk at the National Archives cataloging unsorted education files found an unmarked ledger bound in cracked leather. The spine bore no title. The first page was blank, but on the second page in tight ink, Ashdown Institute Witness Classifications, 1861, 1865. 81 names followed, each with annotations in Latin abbreviations, observata fragilis silens terminata. Some names had lines struck through them. Others were underlined in red. One entry stood out. Line 79, Whitcomb E. Rejected severance, escaped observation, status unresolved. That single line reopened the file. The ledger was authenticated. Handwriting matched Calder's internal memos. The ink formula was consistent with mid-1860s private ministry use. It had been hidden inside an unrelated missionary box from colonial Jamaica. Its rediscovery made no headlines, but it reached the York Gazette. They published a one-column story titled, "Her Name Was Still There." Readers remembered. One woman, elderly, now sent in a note. She was the first adult who ever looked me in the eye and asked what I remembered. Then she gave me her scarf and said, "Keep something they can't catalog." Another sent an envelope. Inside, a pressed violet sewn into linen. No note, no return. In 1941, when the ministry officially closed the file on Ashdown and its affiliates, the final paragraph of the report read, "No further investigation warranted. Institutional records incomplete. No living witnesses with full recollection. Case to be considered historically concluded." And yet, on the final page of that internal memo, someone had penciled one line in the margin. If she escaped, then someone remembers. And if someone remembers, it was not erased. In 1952, nearly 90 years after the fire, the land where Ashdown once stood was cleared for farmland. The new owner, unaware of its history, began excavation for a barn foundation. 3 feet down, the workers struck stone. Beneath that, brick flooring warped by heat. And beneath that, a rusted brass box marked Organ Repairs, 1857. Inside were 27 documents sealed in linen dry, handwriting Eleanor Whitcomb, the originals. The same archive believed lost in the fire. There were records of names, hand-sketched diagrams, floor plans of the third-floor recalibration room, marginalia, phrases underlined induction is not reform. Doctrine must not replace memory. They want silence to be a virtue. The discovery made no front-page news, but archivists, investigators, and historians confirmed its authenticity. And slowly, without fanfare, the file was reopened. The Ashdown doctrine was taught in academic lectures across Britain by the 1960s, listed under ethical failures in institutional reform. Eleanor's name entered historical journals as an independent witness, unsanctioned but indisputably persistent. Her fate remained unknown, but a 1963 registry of the London Poor Hospital noted an anonymous donation to the girls' trauma ward donor E.W. note. For those who remembered too much, let them forget nothing. The field where the box was found was never built on. In 1978, the ministry designated the ground a site of historical memory. No monument was raised. No names were carved. But one plaque, small and weather-worn, was placed at the edge of the field. Here stood a place that tried to erase. But memory, once given, cannot be taken back. May silence never again be called salvation. To this day, visitors leave violets at the stone, some stitched into linen, some wrapped in pages torn from old hymnals, and some simply left without words. Because some stories must be remembered not for justice, which may never arrive, but for the truth they leave behind. Ashdown burned, but the truth did not.